Welcome to Aging Insight with your host, John Ross and Lisa Schollmeyer. This program is made possible by
Welcome to Aging Insight, everybody. I'm John Ross here with Lisa Schollmeyer, and you're watching the best program related to your health, housing, finance, and legal needs from a couple of elder law attorneys that know that this information is so critically important to your successful aging that we come in here to this studio to bring you this information every chance we get.
That's right. And you know, elder law is a particular area of law that some of you may not have heard of before, but it is an area of law where it's not so much about the subject matter, you know, like other lawyers practice criminal law or real estate law or bankruptcy law, but elder law attorneys, we define what we know in our practice by what seniors need to know. So we cover everything from Medicare, Social Security, insurance programs, probate, trust, powers of attorney, guardianships, all the kind of things that seniors may encounter. So that's why the elder law is different from just the regular lawyer on the street.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, unfortunately, a good portion of our practice is related to some not so happy stuff.
That's true.
I mean, there's a lot of getting sick,
Yeah.
needing long-term care. There's a lot of dying.
There is that, but John, we do also have some happy subject matters as well.
Yeah, and not just in the happy results that we get for people, but you know, just because you've gotten a little older doesn't mean you don't still have the capacity for love. And
That's right. So, you know, these days with people living much longer and very active retirement lifestyles, we sometimes get some sad with the happy because sometimes someone may lose a longtime spouse. Maybe they've been married 30, 40 years, and that was a great marriage and they had some great kids. But, you know, if you lose a spouse, you know, many of us, you know, we are social creatures, John, and so a lot of times we socialize and we meet others, and oftentimes, John, there's even some wedding bells in the air where a couple of older folks will enjoy each other's company so much that they decide to get married. So today on Aging Insight, we want to talk about these later life marriages. It is one of the happier aspects of our practice to help clients navigate through this because, John, you know, what's different about a late life marriage compared to maybe some younger folks?
well, a lot.
Yeah.
And while this is happy stuff, it's happy at the moment, but it can turn unhappy later because you just weren't anticipating all of these other factors. Because when you have a later life marriage, you often have a number of different factors that are all coming in at one time. First of all, you've got two people who probably have their own assets. It's not uncommon in fact, just in the last week or two, I bet I've talked to 2 or 3 different couples who are in their 60s, 70s, maybe even 80s, that have, you know, as I ask them, I say, well, do you have a house? Well, we have 2. And the reason they have 2 is because they each had a home prior to marriage, and they live in one of them and maybe use the other one as a rental property, or maybe they just go back and forth. I had just a client this week that they had property in Texas, property in Arkansas, and they went back and forth between the 2. So on the one hand, you're probably going to come into the marriage with your own assets that have been acquired through a lifetime of labor and saving and putting money back and buying things and that sort of stuff. The other thing is that there's almost always going to be kids from outside this current marriage, because you had kids prior, those children are now adults, and now you're marrying somebody who also has kids from a prior marriage who are also adults. So you're bringing in these new people, new assets, and you're mixing all of these things together, And again, that can all work out beautifully if you're looking out for where the problems might come in.
Right. And John, I would say one of the third considerations, besides the assets and the kids, and I'll call them kids, the adults, children that are now being brought in as part of this marriage relationship, is, if this is a later life marriage, the reality is, hopefully you'll have some great years together, but sooner or later, probably sooner, one of the couple is likely to face some real health challenges. And so facing health challenges in a later life marriage is something that should be expected and planned for. It's not something that you think about when, you're 22 and you get married. Of course, that can, health issues can happen to anyone, but we certainly should expect them and plan for them and anticipate them with a later life marriage. So all three of these issues, John, are on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you've got to understand is in this process, you're going to have this period of incapacity where you have the sickness and all of the issues that come with that. You're going to have the period of the transition when one person dies. And then you're going to have these people that you all are now leaving behind. And this can all get very touchy.
That's
in
right.
all of this.
Yeah.
So, I tell you what, we'll take a little early break on this one, and that way we can come back in and we'll have plenty of time to jump in and start with this whole incapacity business and what you need to look out for, particularly in these blended family situations. So stick around, we'll be right back.
Lone Star Truck Group is now hiring service technicians. We also have career opportunities in every department. With 23 locations across the South, work where you want. The best product lines in state-of-the-art facilities. Work with the best employees, receiving great benefits, competitive wages, and a safe, clean work environment. Receive ongoing product training for continuous career development. Contact Lone Star Truck Group today and recruiting at LoneStarTruckGroup.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Aging Insight. And today we're kind of doing a program on a fun topic, and that is companionship and love and later in life. And we're talking about late life marriages. And, we talked about in the earlier segment that this is different because you're bringing in assets. You already have grown adult kids and grandkids and extended family. And you are older, so you do need to anticipate maybe health challenges in the near future. So the first thing I want to talk about is the assets that you bring into the marriage. And John, one of the first things I would recommend to anyone whom I see that comes in and wants to talk about a late life marriage situation is whether or not they should get a prenuptial agreement. And
and it's I'll tell you, it's not really whether or not they should. It's what do we need to put in it?
Well, and how do we convince it, that you should do one? Because I will say that doing prenups with older couples is a little easier than with younger couples. I mean, older couples get it. They have accumulated assets, and while one or the other of them may have more, boy, the blood, sweat, and tears that went into accumulating what you have is important. So, a prenuptial agreement, many of you may have heard of this. Most of us think of a prenuptial agreement for wealthy people. I remember watching some nighttime soap operas like Dallas or Dynasty, and there'd be some talk about a prenup when one of the main characters was going to get married, and that just didn't seem real to someone like me, growing up in this area. However, you don't have to be wealthy to have a prenuptial agreement. You just have to have some property, whether it's real estate, an investment account, CDs, retirement. You just have to have property that you might be bringing with you into a late life marriage. A prenuptial agreement is simply a contract between you and your new spouse about how you're going to treat the property that the two of you bring with you into this marriage. And generally, we're going to set it out that that property you bring in is your separate property and is not to be commingled with any marital property that you may have or acquire, and that if you get divorced or one of you dies, then the property is to be treated and divided a certain way. Typically, John, a prenup is going to say that property you bring into the marriage, should you divorce, it goes back with you out of the marriage.
That's right.
Also, if you die, then that property goes only to your heirs and beneficiaries. Although sometimes, like in the situation of a home, we do make some allowances that a surviving spouse can continue to live in that home, until they decide to move or they themselves pass away. So getting it all in writing up front is great protection on the property side of it.
And again, this is a contract of you deciding what you want to happen with your stuff. There's also another contract out there, and that's the contract you have by being a citizen. That's the laws out there. And the laws have already decided what you can do with your stuff in the context of a divorce or in the context of a death. All marriages end. Some end in divorce, some end in death, but they all end. And the thing is, either you decide on the front end how you want assets to be dealt with, or you're subjecting yourself to a pile of laws and legislators who at any whim can change their minds and start changing how, and I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody come in and say, but that's mine.
Right, that's mine, except for the law says that when, you get sick or you die, then it is available to someone else that you didn't intend for it to be.
So yes, definitely start out with the prenup. In just about every second late life marriage situation, almost always a prenup is going to be a good idea. They'll be different from one person to another, but at least the fundamental part of having one is going to be critically important. Now, I said the first thing here is this incapacity business, and this is actually the one place where the prenup not actually going to help you. When you get into a long-term care situation because of incapacity, maybe you've had a stroke and your level of care is just more than that spouse can take, maybe that you just can't do it at home, and you need something like nursing home care, or maybe you do want to stay at home, but it's going to involve round-the-clock care at $15 an hour. Well, that can be $10,000 a month. So most people cannot afford that, at least not for very long, and so they start looking at government assistance programs, things like Medicaid. Medicaid being the biggest payer of long-term care. Not Medicare, this is Medicaid. Medicare doesn't pay for that stuff like nursing homes. And with Medicaid, when you have a married couple, Medicaid does not see his and hers. They only see y'all's. And that is a very technical legal term.
That's right. Y'all's property is available to pay for the person who is sick or incapacitated.
That's right. And you go back to that wedding ceremony where you promised to take care of each other through sickness and in health. Well, the state takes you to heart on this one.
Yeah, and this is a big area where we see something like, say for instance, an investment portfolio that perhaps the wife brought into the marriage. Maybe this investment portfolio is something her previously deceased husband had left her.
Sure.
She remarried, and now that she still has this investment portfolio, it is clearly her separate property. So from a prenup standpoint and all of that, we can identify that investment portfolio as the wife's property. But if her husband has a stroke and he needs long-term care, then if they look at applying for Medicaid to pay for that care, Medicaid does not recognize that this investment portfolio is something the wife brought into the marriage and was not, and Medicaid just says, hey, you've got a couple $100,000 sitting in an investment portfolio. You better be writing checks for your husband's care, because as a married couple, you have a duty of care and support to your husband. It doesn't matter that the assets came from somewhere else. And John, this is the case where a prenup, I don't care how good it is.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
That's right, because again, they don't see separate property and his and hers. It's just y'all's. And so, for example, I had a husband and wife, and this was a second marriage, recent second marriage. And when they got married, they had done a prenup. In this case, the wife was significantly wealthier than her new husband. And she had a couple of different properties and investment accounts and things like that. And so they had done a prenup in advance. And they actually thought that that prenup would address this situation, because when I met with the two of them and we started talking about long-term care issues and things like that, they said, oh, well, it's not going to be any problem for him because he'll qualify for Medicaid because he doesn't have anything. And it won't be a problem for me because I've got so much money I can pay for it.
Yeah, and so they proudly chunked down the prenup agreement to show it to you that they were good client, good citizens and took care of this.
That's right, not understanding that even though he doesn't have any of his own separate property, they're going to count everything the wife has. And so now, in addition to the prenup, it has become critically important for her to shield those assets so that they will not count for Medicaid purposes. Even though she never anticipates being on Medicaid, we need to protect those assets from her husband's long-term care. Right. And we've seen this so many times where it's the two houses.
Right.
Husband has a house, wife has a house, and they don't have any other real assets, just those two houses. Now one of them needs nursing home care. Well, you can have a home and qualify for Medicaid.
But you can't have two.
But you can't have two.
So yeah,
and these are tragic situations where oftentimes the families are contemplating divorcing just for government benefit programs.
And we don't want to.
We don't want that. So yeah, the estate planning side, the asset protection side becomes critically important in addition to the prenup side of things. Now, there's a few other things we need to talk about, and so we'll cover those in our last segment. So stick around, we'll be right back.
Lone Star Truck Group is now hiring service technicians. We also have career opportunities in every department. With 23 locations across the South, work where you want. The best product lines in state-of-the-art facilities. Work with the best employees, receiving great benefits, competitive wages, and a safe, clean work environment. Receive ongoing product training for continuous career development. Contact Lone Star Truck Group today and recruit him at LoneStarTruckGroup.com.
Welcome back to the last segment of today's Aging Insight, and today we're talking about these second marriages or late life marriages. They don't have to be second.
No,
they could be third or fourth. It doesn't really matter.
I know I had a gentleman the other day, I think he was on number 6, and he said he just liked getting married.
That's right. So when you're exploring these later life marriages, you've got the assets, you've got health issues, you've got separate kids. And so the first thing we talked about is get a prenup. Really get a prenup. Just something that says his is his, hers is hers, that he can do with his what he wants to do, and that she can do with hers what she wants to do. You're still free to have joint checking accounts and things like that, but you're also free to do with your assets whatever you want to do with, as you get on later in life, without having to worry about laws that you don't know and you don't understand imposing their will upon you, because they're out there and they will do that. And so with that prenup, you're just saying, you know what, I don't want the government telling me what I can do with my stuff. Me and my new spouse are going to decide what we want to do with our stuff.
Right. So a prenup is one great planning tool for a later life marriage. Another great tool is using a trust. And you know, a trust is simply a legal arrangement where you set aside property in a legal entity called a trust, and you can be the manager of that entity. You can invest your assets. You can spend your assets. You can do estate planning inside that trust where your assets go only to your children and heirs. And so the estate planning side, when you have a later life marriage, you definitely don't want to leave that to chance. You want to get some documentation in place, because one of the things that we see that tears apart these later life relationships has to do with when a person gets sick or a person is near death, and all of a sudden, you know, these adult kids that are the children of both of these older spouses, they don't know each other very well. They don't, you know, they haven't grown up together. They don't have those relationships. And sometimes things can get very dicey, very dramatic if you and your spouse haven't set out a roadmap for your family well in advance. And John, also the trust can work as well as an asset protection tool.
That's right.
For the event we were talking about earlier, if there is an incapacity of one of these spouses.
That's right. And so you can shield the assets, you can segregate the assets, and you can pass those assets down to whoever you want, whether that's your spouse, whether that's your kids, or some combination of the two. But again, this also goes back to the prenup in the sense that you're free to do the kind of trust planning that you want to do, whether that's include the spouse or not. Because otherwise, you know, people often think, well, this is my stuff, so I don't have to leave it to my new spouse. I can leave it to just my kids. Well, the law says something else. And that's where you get into all of these things. So beyond that, the last thing I wanted to kind of talk about, and it relates to all of these issues as far as transitioning assets while you're incapacitated and on at death, is who your decision makers are. Think through this very carefully. I've had many situations over the years where, take for example, just something as simple as, you know, dad's at the hospital, he's had a stroke or heart attack. There's medical treatment decisions to be made. There's the spouse who loves this person.
Yeah, and maybe they've been married 2 years.
Maybe they've been married 2 years. I've had them where they've been married for 30 years, but the kids are still not kids of this marriage.
Right.
And so whether they've been married for 2 years or 30 years, but that spouse feels like, you know, this is my husband. I'm the one that's been around him for 24 hours a day for the last however long. I know what they want. Meanwhile, you've got the kids over there saying, that person's not even related to our family.
Yeah, that's my daddy in the hospital
bed.
bed.
That's my daddy, and so we think we're the best people to make those medical decisions. Mm-hmm. And often what you'll find is because tempers can get heated.
Yeah, it's
during
a stressful time.
You'll see a lot of times where people have a tendency to just get angry and they go overboard, where maybe the new wife was appointed to make medical decisions, but because the kids were, you know, acting rashly. How about that?
Yes.
The kids were acting rashly. You know, mom tells the hospital, don't tell the kids anything.
Right, and John actually had that happen one time where the 2 adult daughters of the gentleman in the hospital, one of whom was a ICU nurse in a out-of-town facility, the wife said no information should be shared with those daughters, and there ended up being a physical altercation on the campus of the hospital.
Yeah, and I've seen it go from the adult, the husband-wife, where they've blocked access to the kids. I've seen the kids block access to the spouse. And so I've seen it in both directions. And this is, you know, again, this kind of goes back to, who do you want to make your medical decision? Well, that's one question. But the second part of this is, though, who do you want to have access to your medical information? Who do you want to have knowledge about your situation? So, for example, if you want your spouse to make the decisions, but you're okay with your kids having access to information, then say that.
Right. It's all about planning ahead, getting it in writing, setting the expectations between the spouse and the adult children of both sides. You know, it seems like such an unpleasant thing to talk about. And frankly, a lot of the senior adults feel like, hey, these kids, it's really none of their business. I'm a grown adult. I don't consult them about everything. But setting the expectation in a late life marriage situation avoids so much trouble, and you set that expectation by doing the proper documents and communicating what your wishes are with the family.
That's right. So good information today. Good. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you learned a little something. As always, you can check out our magazine, Aging Insights. It's available at your local doctor's office, or you can come by our office and pick up one. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.